Bugün yeşil dönüşüm ülkelerin ana gün.
Welcome to our panel. We will focus on green finance for the real economy, and it is widely accepted that it is not just another option, but an obligation. And also all the green arrangements push companies to have their own green transformation. So they have to act faster. And green transformation requirements, of course, also create a need for green financing, and the rising environmental awareness and creating stricter rules also established a tighter bond between environmental issues and financing alternatives. And like I said, the title of our panel is Green Finance for the Real Economy. And together with us, Elif Yener, Zorlu Energy General Manager of Financial Affairs, Özkan Çimen from Arçelik, Finance and Corporate Risk Director, Turkish Capital Markets Association Independent Board Member Talya Yeşilürdü, and Development Investment Bank of Turkey Executive Vice President Seçil Kızılkaya Yıldız. So first, let's focus on corporate actions and its implications on the real economy. And my first question goes to Elif Yener. And as Zorlu Energy, I want to ask you a question. You utilize different green instruments, and you are one of the leading and innovative sector names. Garanti BBVA issued a green fund, and you were the first ones to benefit it. And you also have a collaboration model with EBRD. So when it comes to renewable investments and its financing, is it possible to conclude that financing instruments are getting more and more diversified, and will you come up with different instruments in the future? Well, thank you for this comprehensive question. Since 2009 or 10, we'll continue with our renewable investments, and within this scope, we are always in collaboration with international development banks. In the last 10 years, looking at the last 10 years, well, I can tell you that we wanted to have a sustainable and continuous electric power so that we could provide 24/7 electricity. But then this target turned into a love for green transformation. And of course, banks supported us greatly in this endeavor. Recently, well, we have gained significant experience, and all the experience show us that rather than fossil fuels, financing based on green energy is quite easier to achieve and to have access to, because banks have green frameworks and we can easily comply with their frameworks. Like I said, in 2010, we've started our efforts with wind energy, and we followed the compatibility criteria. We wanted to make sure that we were in compliance with green standards, and it was quite a learning experience for us. And then in 2018, together with Garanti Bank, we had the first green issuance, and we started to receive ESG ratings for our companies. And it was a $10 million loan contract. Again, together with EBRD in 2018, we initiated an electricity distribution project, and it was a financing project, and we focused on social gender equality as well, which focuses on equal share of women and men being employed. and also United Nations Women Empowerment Principles is something that we are also in compliance with, thanks to the support of EBRD. But other than that, the non-loan borrowing markets, well, how is it in Turkey? It evolved greatly in Turkey, and it's not just limited to Turkey. Looking at Turkish bond market, it's around 150 billion Turkish liras, and only 15 billion Turkish liras of it come from bonds or are allocated to the sector. And this is, unfortunately, this has quite a low percentage for green funds. But in 2020, we had a sustainable sukuk issuance together with TSKB. And the purpose of sukuk was to make electrical vehicles widespread in Turkey. And we focused on charging stations in that project. And goals were to lower carbon emissions and to strengthen electrical vehicle network. And just like it is in the entire world, we wanted to evolve into a greener environment, and we're hoping that such initiatives will continue and increase in the future. And as you know, we had a Eurobond issuance too, and our new investments, well, let's say new green investments, are focusing on geothermal on one side, and in the future, with all the new investments, we target to issue a project bond with a maturity over 10 years. It'll be a green bond, like I said. Well, okay, thank you so much. And let's continue with Özkan Çimen now. Well, looking at Arçelik, Arçelik is the first industrial company to issue a bond on international markets. Well, can you walk us through with the issuance? What were the challenges? What were the windows of opportunities for you? Can you elaborate on it? Well, thank you. Like you stated, in May, we issued a bond, and it was the first green bond issuance coming from an industrial company. But let me share some figures. In 2019, global ESG issuance was 300, and then it rose to 500 million in 2020. And when it comes to sustainability, well, we had several processes back in the previous year, so we were matured enough on a certain level. And now we can set long and strategic targets while planning our investments. So there was a significant increase in issuance markets. So thanks to our 2020 analysis, we made sure that we could be successful in this issuance. So together with our consultants, what we did first was to list the green projects. And this is quite exhausting, actually. It is exhausting because you have to evaluate all investments one by one with engineers and with related authorities so that you can understand which ones are, in essence, green projects and which ones are not. So we came up with lists. And then it was presented to second party opinion providers. And the challenges on that front is that there are no clear standards on whether a project is green or not. So we introduced the projects that we believed could support environmental efforts. So it was quite a time-consuming period for us. And we categorized our projects. So for example, in energy efficiency, we made sure that we could improve processes, we could increase efficiency, we could reduce waste. And we also focused on wastewater management, collecting rainwater, and recycled packages and so. So these are the details of our overall investments. And then we went for a roadshow for the issuance. And we had to do a lot more. For example, we first set all the details, we set the prescription for it, and we were always in contact with legal authorities as well as the related financial institutions, and we got the ratings for our projects. And after the roadshow, we realized that there were a lot of questions focusing on ESGs. And during our roadshow, we reached to 55 investors. And by the way, these were like meetings that would take an entire day, but it gave us the opportunity to introduce all of our projects and plans. So in essence, what I can say is that sustainability story of Arçelik was directly reflected to all investors thanks to our roadshow meetings. And being the first company to issue a green bond made us really proud. And it was a 350 million euros of an issuance. And we received demand from approximately 200 investors. And we received 1.6 billion euros of a demand. And it was quite a successful one. Okay, thank you so much.
I would like to go to Ms. Talia. The capital markets struggles against the climate crisis and their necessary financial resources provision in terms of reaching SDGs. They play an important role, and the Turkish Capital Markets Association's efforts to develop these in our country and these efforts. Can you explain the steps taken? Our association is focusing on sustainability efforts with training activities, particularly 2020 activity reports of Capital Market Board. Sustainability reports were mandatory, and we received requests for education and training. And in order to increase awareness, the employees of capital markets, in order to respond to their comprehensive needs, we initiated the certificate program. We initiated this program in February 2021. A total of 125 people joined, and 4 groups trainings were completed. And these trainings can also be done on a group-specific basis. There were certain demands that we met, and the program had 5 modules, and it was a 62-hour program developed by our association and 2 other education entities. There were specialized academics, company representatives, environmental engineers working in those disciplines, risk management specialists, as well as individuals from many other fields who were teaching these courses. And the attendee profile was also interesting because there were representatives of every group of profession. And in addition to companies, there were doctors, there were participants, attendees from Germany. We had a participant who completed the program hailing from Germany. So these awareness and training activities were supplemented by we chose sustainability as the main topic. So the highest number of speakers, the highest number of topics are around the topic of sustainability. And we wanted to target that it was discussed in all aspects. We also hold various panels, online meetings, investor meetings, to increase the sectoral awareness. And the Capital Market Board employees needed this, as we have identified. And our association has a research magazine that is published quarterly. And in the summer edition, our theme was sustainability in capital market with certain researches and articles. And other than that, the topic of sustainability was one of the priority areas of the board of directors of the association, and we created a task force. What else can the association do? How can we make widespread the financing of sustainability? How can we make it more effective? These are the topics that we discussed, and the highest priority was identifying the green bond standards. And of course, we were in touch with the Capital Market Board. And in the economy reforms package, this issue was included, which accelerated the process. The members of the association assumed three roles about sustainability. Banks, are the issuers of green bonds, and portfolio management companies, because of the portfolios and funds they manage, they assume the role of the investors, and the banks are the intermediaries in the green bond issuance and in Sukuk. And considering all those roles, the necessary incentives were studied, and I will be conveying them in the subsequent sections. Thank you, Ms. Taliye. I would like to go back to Ms. Seçil. In the transition to low carbon, finance industry plays an important role, particularly the development banks, the power that they have. They place importance to using the power they have on sustainable goals. So can you inform us about the Turkey's Development and Investment Bank? I wish the best for the Congress, for all the parties. You're moderating very well with distinguished panelists, and I would like to greet all the participants. Thank you for this question. This is very important for us. And as the Development Bank of Turkey, we are going to be celebrating our 47th anniversary on November 27. Of course, sustainable development is our most important priority. And in this sense, in sustainable financing, in project financing, in investment banking, sustainable, being the leader and we want to be the pioneers and leaders in this. And as a development bank, we've got strategic priorities to reduce the current deficit, to increase exports, to increase employment, to reduce foreign dependency, and sustainable development, and to increase financing for the priority regions. And every year, the international development financing institutions, we bring their funds of various sizes. 1/3 of the funds that we have brought in the last 20 years were brought in the last 3 years. Why am I emphasizing this? Because the resources that we have brought, all of them are sustainable resources, and they have been channelized, they have been drawn down to finance impacts in our country, struggling with the climate crisis. You know, there are 17 SDGs, and our intention is to serve them all. And the activities that we do, the loans that we offer, directly and indirectly support 13 out of these 17 SDGs. And as a bank, we bring resources, funds from international financing, Deutsche Bank, Japan International Corporation, and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as well as the World Bank. And as of the end of 2020, our portfolios, 63%, consist of sustainability-related loans. And up until now, we have financed sustainability-themed loans, and we prevent about 3 million tons of carbon release per year, which is an important key performance indicator for us. And of course, there are many green themed loans. You shouldn't restrict it with green, but the development financing institutions have new themes from us, and we proceed in different methods every year. Our country's needs and their investments on sustainability, we analyze them all the time. And briefly, let me summarize the resources that we have introduced so that it will be meaningful for the audience. In line with the needs of our country, we have signed loan agreements. One was the 316 million euros formal employment creation. And we have emergency company support project, $100 million geothermal energy development project, and $38 million worth of risk sharing mechanism, which have been signed this year. And there was a $5 million loan from the Asian Development Bank. And we have received a long-term Turkish lira investment undertaking loan from the Turkish Central Bank of 170 million were provided for renewables, and 55 million euros for municipal infrastructure and solar energy. And recently, COVID also can be assessed as a sustainability theme, and international financing resources out of them. We were the ones that brought the highest amount of resources. And impact investments create more resources because sustainability and struggling against climate change is an overall struggle, and the financing part cannot be missing. So all the financing institutions have related regulations and adjustments for impact investments. And as a development and investment bank, we want an environmentally friendly economy, and renewables and energy efficiency investments are financed by us. And we do the flagging and the mapping of these, whichever SDG is served in which way is mapped by us. And when you look at it overall, what we have been doing for 47 years is to ensure that sustainable development is financed by thematic resources in line with the SDGs. And similarly, 3 years ago, with the change in the legislation and the law, investment banking was also brought under our roof, and alternative, rather than conventional, alternative instruments were designed and products were issued, and they were brought to our country. And I would like to talk about bond issuance briefly. The first transition bond, the bond for transition to low carbon economy. We created the framework for this in line with the international ECMA standards, and the reports being created by a different independent entity, and bringing this product to Turkey. This was an effort by us. Amount-wise, it wasn't high. It was about 200 million Turkish lira worth, but the design was very important. The impact analysis was made and the calculations were made by an independent entity. And this bond, the investments to be made with the proceeds of this bond of 200 millions, 1.9 million tons of carbon release would be prevented by a third-party consultant, which we believe is an important development because these green bonds and draft guide has been issued, and hopefully in this year it will be finalized. And this will be in line with international standards, international legislation, and we will have significant additional efforts, I can say with all confidence. Thank you. I would like to move on to second stage questions. Partnerships and international experiences. I would like to talk about that. And Ms. Elif, my question, in Europe and the US, low carbon energy transformation steps are being taken and intensive resources are allocated. To meet the financing requirements, what are the global tendencies? And out of the support projects for climate financing overseas, can Turkey benefit from that? And a second question, within the scope of energy industry, the investment and financing requirement for zero carbon, how will energy companies manage this? As you know, as a nearby country, the biggest share goes to the European Union, and they have moved on to a new taxonomy, a carbon tax. It has been introduced or will be introduced. When we talk about carbon tax, the main input of all companies is electricity. So on the electricity side, carbon release reduction projects are necessary. And in Turkey, in the last decade, let me say 15 years, since 2005, Turkey is launching new investments, and new renewable energy projects have been developed within the scope of YEKDEM. And their financing is YEKDEM is the Renewable Energy Resources Support Mechanism. IFC, EBRD, FMO, Asian Development Bank, Japan Development Bank, banks like this, in the past days, they focused on projects in Turkey, both through private banks or directly, and we also benefited from these funds. Yapı Kredi Bank and Japan Development Bank signed a deal, and we financed a geothermal project. IFC, EBRD, EIB, European Development Bank directly funded some projects. And on the electricity distribution side, we are working with development banks. So actually, these loan products are products that we're benefiting as a company. The head of the EBRD made an announcement, and he said by the end of this year, EBRD will be funding projects worth 1.5 billion US dollars, half of which is allocated for green financing only by the end of 2021. And by 2025, green financing will be doubled. They intend to double their risks there. So on this transformation on the energy side and how it will be funded is signaled by this explanation, particularly in Turkey. Another resource is that in line with the developments across the world, sustainable green and social bonds, Euro bonds, can be ensured with the more widespread use of those Euro bonds in the markets. And in order to access the markets, financial markets, companies need to work more like in the form of different reporting, obtaining the ESG ratings of projects and reporting how they would reduce the carbon release, and the assurance and the verification of that assurance of that compliance. They will need to work with different companies and experience. I think we will gain experience in that regard, because at the end of the day, the first step was financing to be obtained from the international development banks, and for the bonds and the Euro bonds, the companies need to do these exercises. And there are certain horizon projects done in Europe, particularly about power generation. There are horizon supports and grants. As Turkish companies, we can use such supports. For instance, on the geothermal side, we got certain research and development projects to store the carbon releases underground. And we have already received a 4 billion euro grant support within the scope of the Horizon. And in order to implement these projects, which are of much bigger scale, which require a huge capital support, in terms of both access, this is going to facilitate access to financing resources, and also the supports will be free to flow. And such projects are being announced by the Sustainable Funding Association, and there are also training courses, and the companies can take part in such training courses, and they can keep up with the publications of such associations to find them. Mr. Özkan, Arçelik's green financing related experiences are available with international finance institutions. So what were the advantages of working with international financing institutions, and what were the challenges, and what were the pros and cons of working with green bonds? Recently, we have signed the green loan contract with EBRD, and the head of the EBRD was also there during the signature ceremony. And the framework for the new green bond and the projects there, we also benefited from them. It was a similar process. And we worked with consultant advisor companies. We went through them one by one. And the perspective of the international financing companies is that the companies that will invest in sustainability, they want to hear what those companies did and their future goals. And once they decide on investment, another important factor for them is that where this financing will be spent, in what areas, which brings about a verification component. So the contents of the project as well as the verification process goes on. In 2019, we conducted environmentally sensitive research and development project, and we had obtained loans from the EBRD, and the environmental outputs are regularly being reported. So there is a transparent process, both in terms of implementing and reporting the investment. So a similar process will be carried out for this new loan. And this triggered a transformation in the sense that being more conversant with the contents of the project and to build a project, an infrastructure that will enable this, and to review them regularly. If there are any projects that can be postponed, ensuring that alternatives are created, and to comply with the schedule as much as possible. And similarly, with the green bond process, in this process as well, we obtained a significant financing source with suitable costs, and it was in favorable terms. And one of the most important factors was that the prior risk and opportunity analysis and what projects we targeted, they already had the infrastructure in place, which gave us a significant advantage. Thank you, Ms. Talia. Currently, overseas and domestically, the bond and sukuk issuances, how are they doing it? What's the framework? And the Capital Market Board published a Green Deal draft and guidelines. Why did they need such guidelines?
As it is emphasized in all panels, the EU Green Deal reflects its new and competitive strategy, and it shows that there is going to be a green competition going on, but green technologies require long-term investments, infrastructure investments, and also the transformation of the respective fields. And as the fifth largest trading partner of EU, given the export potential and the competitiveness, in order to maintain our position, we focus on infrastructure investments and production transformation, and also waste management. We have to fulfill our responsibilities, which require a great amount of investments. And when it comes to financing those investments, green funds and sukuk have a great share in the financing needs, and the share is increasing with each passing year, and the pace is quite fast. Looking at Turkey, domestic companies, well, oftenly export, but their means and opportunities are limited. And the number of not listed companies carrying out issuances were quite limited. They don't have the same means, and the cost is the same. And we lack a standard. Again, they they apply to CMB and they are not labeled. So both the data quality and the awareness should increase. So within this scope, green bonds and sukuk need a specific market under Borsa Istanbul. We need a special index so that we can help increase awareness so that they can become more popular and so that they can have further liquidity. CMB green bonds and green instruments and green leasing certificate draft was published recently. And of course, they followed international principles and they took reference the European guidelines. And in the draft, green project is defined, of course, in compliance with the standards. And the green examples are given so that sectors can understand which projects can be labeled as or can be issued as green bonds. And it is quite important to inform the entire sector: energy efficiency, reducing air pollution, waste management, smart agricultural practices, sustainable fishery. These are just some examples that were included in the draft, and that draft includes many categories that is incompatible with international standards. For example, buildings and their green transformations. These are all can be done and financed through green bonds. But when we say green transformation, it requires a long-term borrowing. It requires a long-term source utilization. So that is why green bonds and sukuk is a great instrument for our green efforts. All right, thank you so much, Ms. Talia. And let's continue with you, Ms. Seçil. International development institutions have green programs, and can you introduce them to us? What can you say about them? Sure, ensuring sustainable development is a global priority. So development financing institutions, global funds, and green climate funds offer great opportunities to support sustainable development and to fight poverty in low to mid-income countries. And there are many possible programs. Multilateral financing institution reports show that multilateral institutions have offered a $66 billion worth of climate funds, and $38 billion of it will be allocated to low and mid-income countries. $20 billion of that program was provided by World Bank, and it is again allocated to low to mid-income countries. Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank. There are many banks that took part in this initiative. I don't want to list the entire, all the banks here, but European Investment Bank, European Development Bank, and Islamic Development Group are all other institutions that took part in this commitment, and they will be allocated in two main categories. One is to mitigate the negative effects of climate change. This will be one financing pillar, which will allocate $50 billion of it, and the rest of it will go to the harmonization and the adaptation to climate change. But the mitigation side of it, mitigating the negative aspects, negative consequences of climate change would include transportation, energy, and energy efficiency. This takes more than half of the allocated budget, and also all related issues like mitigating carbon emission, wastewater, fishery, forestry, low carbon and energy efficient power generation, and non-energies, greenhouse reduction of non-energy green gas emissions. And also international institutions have their green programs too, and let me brief you on it. Of course, these are too comprehensive and detailed, but I will brief you. For example, EBRD has this green economy financing facility, which focuses on investing green technologies, and they will support enterprises and households who wants to invest in green investments. And they target to eliminate 7 million tons of carbon emission. Again, transitioning to green economy and green financing will be supported until 2050. And they want to increase their efforts. And again, 25 million tons of annual carbon emission reduction is among their goals. Japanese bank has a program too. Construction power plants with green energy is a part of it. Green Catalyst program offers support to infrastructure projects. World Bank has their own climate projects as well, and they will support countries to reach their goals to fight climate change, and they will also support integration efforts. And then Islamic Development Banks offer a program, and there is this green sukuk issued with an amount of $1 billion, and 57 countries can finance various green projects. And in the future, I believe that one of the global priorities will be sustainability and green transformation. So all these programs and financing means show us that financing institutions and development institutions are ready to provide a global support. Okay, thank you, Ms. Seçil. And in the last round, let's focus on the dissemination of green efforts and the recommendations for companies. Well, I'm going to ask the same question to all panelists here. Environmentally friendly projects and their financing. So what steps should be taken? What would be your recommendations? And also, how can we make conventional instruments greener? So let's start with Ms. Elif. Thank you. We don't have much time, so I'll try to be brief with my answer. Well, reporting departments should transform too. We are publicly listed companies, and we are so accustomed to CMB reporting. We were quite rapid in our adaptation. And our 2021 report will be an integrated report. But my recommendation to other companies is that, especially on sustainability side, establish a department that can focus on sustainability. Okay, so we have a parallel question now, and this was a great answer. Under the ESG discipline, where are we? So there is still a lot to do, I suppose. Well, yes, right now it is based on a voluntary basis. We are working towards becoming a green company. So we started to receive our ESG ratings, and by next year, we will publicly announce all the latest information, and this will be another commitment. And of course, it'll reflect our commitment to green transformation. We are more than willing to take part and fulfill our responsibilities in green transformation. And I suppose green funds and sources will prefer solely energy. And likewise, if other companies want to come front, well, then they have to start working on these issues. And I suppose there was a second question. Oh yeah, the conventional products and then becoming greener, yeah. Well, in Turkey, we are one of the largest companies that benefit from Turkish lira-based bond markets. And now green funds and leasing certificates are being discussed. And we shared our guidelines, well, our manual on this issue. And after that, I believe that there can be several incentives coming from the government side. and or there is this certain withholding tax. But if you want to make this market popular, maybe we can lower the withholding tax, or maybe we can postpone it a bit, because it'll be a great attraction for investors. Then investors will be interested in these instruments, and it'll help the growth of this market, but it'll also help deepen the market, and more people will become interested, and it'll also lower financing costs. Okay, thank you. Let's continue with Mr. Özkan, and I ask the same question to you. Well, looking at the core and the essence of Arçelik, well, you will see that we have been investing more than 10 years in this respective field. And it is not just a side business. We established a directorate and we're yielding the fruits. So when it comes to sustainability, I mean, R&D, financing department, HR, supply chain, procurement, all departments integrated sustainability in their efforts. So my recommendation to real sector companies is to have an individual department that can solely focus on this issue. And after determining their needs, they have to come up with their own roadmap. And also, let me talk about ESG indexes that Arçelik is a part of. In 2019 and 2020, Arçelik was chosen as the industrial leader by Dow Jones Indexes. But what's the advantage? Well, this is a great picture for you to self-assess and realize your shortcomings, and so that you can plan your investments to get to a better position. Well, maybe they can set a similar target. You know, companies can do that. And on the other hand, well, let's talk about incentives too. How can we make the current instruments greener? Well, we need incentive mechanisms, because they will be hugely beneficial, both to sectors and the financial markets. Looking at the European examples, there is this energy efficiency fund, which is a great practice. There are some grants, or there are some alternative grant financing. These will all be beneficial. And if companies will issue bonds to cover their financing needs, well, there have to be parallel incentives, for example, R&D incentives or tax incentives. These will be great to support sustainability too. And what can be the subtitles? Like, companies borrowing from a certain level can have incentives so that their borrowing costs can decrease, and so that they can become more competitive. And also, companies being listed in those indices can be eligible for further incentives. That would be great too. Okay, Ms. Talia, can we have your views on this question too? Well, just like stated by all panelists, what is indispensable here are the incentives. Well, all the issuances and the financings. Well, without related incentives, you cannot support these endeavors, and you cannot help green bonds transform into a solid and sustainable instrument. And there might be incentives for the investors, or like 10% decrease on the withholding tax, or totally eliminating withholding tax. These are all great options. But looking at the maturity structures in Turkey, for example, personal retirement schemes can also become green instruments in Turkey. And the personal retirement funds can have quite, or they are under great competition and a great pressure. So eliminating the withholding tax would serve greatly to this goal. And they will also bring an additional yield to personal or private pension funds. and also lowering taxes, grants, etc. These would be beneficial too. Or you can lower the borrowing costs for the green bonds because it's higher than the conventional bonds. All the consultancies for the green projects or the approval of projects or all the reports coming from international bodies or all the use of proceeds reports. I mean, these are all costly, but these are included in our draft presented by the CMB. The highest cost in these issues is the consultancy fees. And also preparing the framework certificate. These are the most expensive items when we're talking about green bonds. And the verification and annual monitoring reports are also really expensive. Just like in other borrowing instruments, there's this independent audit requirement. Maybe we can change the situation for green bonds because they are carrying out all sorts of other reporting. So maybe there can be an arrangement on this. But all those reports need the establishment of different departments, directors. There will be a great manpower needed. There is a great deal of labor here, which will add to the current costs, and also issuance and the intermediary fees. Well, CMB, Borsa Istanbul, and the security exchange charge all sorts of fees. Well, these reports are carried out so that we can make sure everything is on international standards. Of course, these are necessary, but with all the expenses, we need a balance between being transparent and making everything available to the public. If we want the system to grow, then all these expenses might become deterrent factors. So how can we overcome this? Well, maybe regulatory bodies can make arrangement on the fees. Maybe they can drop it by 50% or they can drop it to a minimum. For example, Borsa Istanbul research or reports have similar practice for some certain reportings. Maybe they can partially cover the expenses, or when it comes to grants and reliefs, maybe these can be limited to a certain percentage of the total amount of the issuance. And if we're talking about a security in these green bonds, well, there is this significant stamp tax. There's a stamp duty. Maybe we can have some arrangement on that too. Additional reporting is a must. Labor is a must, which all increase expenses. So maybe having an incentive mechanism would be beneficial. And bond guarantee fund is a thing which eases the issuance of green bonds. And if you want to accelerate your pace in this field, then there might be additional incentives.
And this increases the interest, and we believe that this fund will have a significant addition. And then there is the mechanism for borrowing instruments. Can you please wrap up, because we're running out of time? And the borrowing instrument owners entity. If this project class is opened, this is going to be effective, and the investors should have a say, as we believe. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Seçil. Briefly, I want to talk about incentives because the panelists have already explained it in detail, but I'm going to wrap up real fast and move on to the other one. And out of the why do we move and how do we move from conventional products to green products? And one is the important reason is one is standardization. The guideline draft is enabling this, and incentives are both on the investor and the issuer side. Ms. Talia gave all the details, and this is something, I don't think there's anything to add there. And on the other hand, what can be the recommendations for green transformation? The risks for climate change are now among the fundamental risks. The World Economic Fund's global risks include this. And also 2018 climate crisis and the associated natural disasters totaled $165 billion. And a century later, this is going to constitute 10% of the GDP for the US. And there are extreme weather conditions that our country is being affected by. So our most important recommendations for the companies is accelerate the adaptation investments to green transformation, and the carbon tax will be launched in 2026, and the investments need to be adapted. Circular economy, protection against disasters, and all the investments should be dealt with and tackled together, and all the companies need to go into a transition phase together. And as the CMB, we want to do more than we're willing to do this. We are eager to do this. We are here for conventional borrowing, and all the legislation changes are being made. And as the investment banks, we're trying to extend to companies any and all kinds of supports during the space of green transition. Thank you. Indeed, the real sector and the financial industry will be working hand in hand. And the comments and the questions received indicate that they are thanking all the institutions for their exemplary practices. There's a brief question. Actually, this was discussed initially, and Arçelik and Zorlu's issuance plans in the near future in international markets. Mr. Özkan Çimen, can you briefly answer them? Green investment and sustainability investments are always going to be on the agenda for us. So in that perspective, if the right conditions arise, when we find the adequate number of projects and sizes, we can think of such an issuance. While it's not possible to give a timeline for that, it can be in the agenda anytime. The same is applicable for us, and we're rather, because we work with international development banks, we used to proceed with loans, but this year in June, maybe Zorlu Renewables issued a Eurobond, and the financing of existing investments was the case there. So it was not possible for us to offer green financing. And in order to be able to offer an actual green financing, at least minimum 40% of the funds should be allocated for a new investment. So in the future, as new investments arise, green bonds and Euro bonds will be in the works for us. And I don't project this being in the short term. And in the short term, we might convert the existing Eurobonds into a sustainability indexed Eurobond. This is the end of our panel, and thank you, dear panelists, and have a wonderful day.